want to talk to you about your priorities. You see, activity doesn't necessarily mean accomplishment in your life or my life. So let's talk about three really important insights about priorities that are going to help you really do better in life and be more successful. Number one, working smarter has a higher return than working harder. And yet, so many times people put a great emphasis upon how hard they work. This is a story I want to share with you that kind of will illustrate the point. Two woodcutters placed a bet about which of them could cut down more trees in a day. So at dawn, they went their opposite direction with their axes. And in the beginning of that day, the two of them seemed to be working just about the same pace. But after about an hour, the first man could hear that the second man had paused in his work. And so the first guy, he's kind of amazed that his rival would tire so quickly, but the first man figured that this was his chance to get ahead, so he doubled his efforts. About 10 minutes later, he heard the sound of the second man cutting the wood again. When he heard the second woodcutter stop again a while later, it only added to the first man's confidence. He said, "Oh my gosh, this is my chance to get ahead." So he even worked harder to increase his lead. Now this happened off and on all day until an hour before sundown, the time when the two men had agreed to stop and compare their progress. The first man proudly showed the second how many trees he had cut down, expecting the second man to be impressed. But the second man mildly complimented him on his work, and then he showed him what he had done. And the second man had cut down almost twice as many trees. How is that possible? The first man asked. Well, it's simple. The second man said, "Every hour I sharpen my axe. Hard work beats no work, but smart work beats hard work." I just say to you and me that while we're swinging that axe, we should sometimes be sharpening it to get the greater return. It's not how hard you work, it's how smart you work. The second thought I want to give you is that being proactive beats being reactive. I've said this before. Every day you're either preparing, which is proactive, or you're repairing, you're reactive. So proactive people prepare, reactive people repair. Proactive people, they plan ahead. Reactive people, they live in the moment. Proactive people, they pick up the phone. In other words, they initiate action and conversation. Reactive people, they're sitting around waiting for other people to call them. When's the phone going to ring? Proactive people anticipate problems, and reactive people, they respond when there are problems. Proactive people, they seize the moment, and reactive people are always waiting for the right moment, which usually never comes. Proactive people control their schedule. Reactive people let other people control their time and their calendar. Proactive people invest time in people because they're making sure that the people they're with will give them that return. Reactive people, they don't invest time, they spend time with people. There's not going to be any return there. So I encourage you to be proactive in your life, and you do that when you prioritize correctly versus being reactive. And then number three, nobody, you, me, none of us can have it all. And the good is always the enemy of the best. So how do we look at the good and the best and prioritize this and choose always the best? When I was in college working on a business degree, I first came into contact with the teaching of Pareto and the Pareto principle. That graphic has been shown to you right now. And as you watch that graphic and as you see it, it's very obvious that if you prioritize correctly, if you've got 10 things to do and you put the first two important things to do clear at the top, number one and number two, they are the most important. If you prioritize correctly and you only do the top two, that 20% at the top, that 20%, look what it does on that graphic. It gives you an 80% return on your production. That's powerful. The 20% of your priorities is going to give you the 80% of your production. So if you spend your time, your energy, your money, and you put your personnel in that top percent, that top 20% of your priorities, you're going to get a huge return out of it. Now, that graphic and that principle absolutely changed my life. As I sat in that class working on my business degree that day as a young person, I said, if I can understand Pareto and how it works and prioritize correctly and always do the most important things in my life, that's when I'll get the highest return. In fact, if you look at that graphic and let's say you didn't do those top 2 things that give you the 80% return, but you did the other 8 things that weren't as important as the top 2, you only get a 20% return. And again, that was the day I realized it's not how hard you work, it's how smart you work. The activity is not always accomplishment. So let me give you some examples. For example, time. 20% of our time produces about 80% of our results. I find that if you're a morning person, you should do your most important things in the morning because you get your highest return. If you're an evening person, you should do the most important things in the evening. Whenever you're your best, your strongest, you're most aware and awake, whatever that time is, that's when you need to do the important things of life. Counseling, I've found that 20% of the people that you know will take up 80% of your time in wanting to talk to you about their issues and their problems. If you produce products, 20% of the products that you produce will give you about 80% of your profits. If you read a book, 20% of the book contains about 80% of the content. Now time out for a moment. That's not true of my books. That's true of all those other books, but not mine. Jobs, 20% of our work gives us 80% of our satisfaction. That's true. Speeches, 20% of the presentation in our speech or our talk creates probably 80% of the impact. I found that donors in my nonprofit organizations, 20% of those donors will give me 80% of the money. In the area of taxes, 20% of the people are going to pay 80% of the taxes. And in leadership, 20% of the people are going to make 80% of the decisions. And then this is the real important one. If you're having a picnic, 20% of the people will eat 80% of the food. That's a fact. Now, what Pareto teaches us again is so powerful that the key to accomplishing much isn't working hard, it's prioritizing correctly. And you can take charge of your life and accomplish the things that you desire to do when you begin to change your priorities in life. So, before you do your roundtable today, one more time, just kind of do a check on yourself. How well am I prioritizing? And as you share with your friends around the table now, be honest. Let them know not only what you do well, but what you don't do well. We learn so much from the failures of others. So be open, listen well, share, and then remember, at the end of the roundtable, find one thing that you can immediately take action on, because that's where your life will be changed.